I'm an ICU physician at Riverside Memorial Medical Center in Ashwood, North Carolina, or at least I was, until I submitted my resignation letter 2 months ago. You can call me Dr. Isabella Hartwell if you want. What I'm about to tell you about is the one patient that made me question everything I thought I knew about death, the afterlife, and the thin veil between our world and whatever exists beyond it, and ultimately led me to leave intensive care medicine forever. Riverside Memorial Medical Center sits on the banks of the Neuse River, serving the greater Ashwood metropolitan area and the rural communities scattered throughout eastern North Carolina. It's a 500-bed regional medical center with a state-of-the-art 32-bed intensive care unit that handles everything from major trauma cases to complex post-surgical patients requiring critical care monitoring. During my 12 years at Riverside Memorial, I've been responsible for the care of over 3,000 critically ill patients. I've held the hands of dying teenagers after car accidents, helped elderly patients transition peacefully after long battles with cancer, and guided countless families through the most difficult decisions they'll ever face. I thought I had seen every possible variation of human suffering, recovery, and death. Most people in the ICU called me Dr. Hart, though the overnight nursing staff had given me the nickname, the Guardian, because of my habit of making extra rounds during the early morning hours. When patients are most vulnerable, I preferred the night shifts, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., because that's when the ICU reveals its true nature. During the day, there's activity, visitors, hope, but at night, between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., the ICU becomes a different place entirely. It's during those quiet hours that life and death decisions are made, that families say their final goodbyes, and that miracles and tragedies unfold in equal measure. I specialized in critical care medicine because I believed in the science of saving lives. 12 years of medical training had taught me to trust in protocols, medications, medical equipment, and empirical evidence. I could read heart rhythms, interpret blood gas results, calculate medication dosages, and predict patient outcomes based on clinical data and established medical knowledge. But I had never encountered anything like what happened in room 237 during the autumn of 2023. The case I'm about to describe began on a crisp October evening, when the leaves along the Neuse River were just beginning to turn brilliant shades of orange and red. October 15, 2023, was a relatively quiet night in our ICU, until the ambulance call came in at 11:47 p.m. Paramedics were transporting a 29-year-old woman named Seraphina Blackwood from a small town called Mill Haven, about 45 minutes northwest of Ashwood. Seraphina had collapsed at her home under circumstances that were both tragic and mysterious. According to the initial report, Seraphina lived alone in an old Victorian house that had been in her family for 3 generations. She worked as a librarian at the Mill Haven Public Library and was known throughout the small community as a quiet, intelligent woman who kept largely to herself, but was always kind to the children who visited the library after school. On the evening of October 15th, Seraphina's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield, had noticed that all the lights in the Blackwood house were on at an unusual hour. Mrs. Whitfield knew Seraphina's routines well. She was a creature of habit, who typically went to bed early, and was very conscious about turning off lights to save electricity. Concerned Mrs. Whitfield had walked across the street and knocked on Seraphina's front door. When no one answered, she tried the door and found it unlocked. She called Seraphina's name as she entered the house and found her collapsed on the living room floor, unconscious and barely breathing. The paramedics arrived at Seraphina's house at 10:23 p.m. They found her in cardiac arrest and immediately began CPR. After 12 minutes of resuscitation efforts, they managed to restore her heartbeat, but Seraphina remained unconscious and unresponsive. Her vital signs were weak and unstable during the 45-minute transport to our hospital. When Serafina arrived in our emergency department at 11:52 p.m., she presented a complex medical puzzle. Her initial blood work showed no signs of drug overdose, poisoning, or any obvious medical condition that would explain her collapse. Her heart rhythm was irregular, but responding to medication, and her blood pressure was dangerously low, but stabilizing with IV fluids and vasopressors. Jonathan Pierce, our emergency department director, called me down from the ICU at 12:30 a.m. to evaluate Serafina for admission to critical care. What I found was a young woman in severe medical distress, with no clear explanation for her condition. Serafina was intubated and on mechanical ventilation. Her neurological responses were minimal. She would occasionally grimace in response to painful stimuli, but showed no signs of consciousness or awareness. Her pupils were reactive to light, which was encouraging from a neurological standpoint, but her overall brain function appeared significantly compromised. Dr. Amanda Chen, our staff neurologist, performed an initial consultation at 1:15 a.m. Her assessment was cautiously optimistic, but uncertain. The good news, Dr. Chen explained to me, is that there's no evidence of massive stroke or catastrophic brain injury. Her brain CT shows some swelling, likely from the period of cardiac arrest, but nothing that would preclude recovery. The challenging part is that we don't know what caused her to collapse in the first place. Blood tests were negative for common toxins, illegal drugs, and medication overdoses. Serafina's medical history, obtained from her primary care physician in Millhaven, showed no significant health problems, no psychiatric medications, and no previous episodes of fainting or cardiac issues. She was, by all accounts, a healthy 29-year-old woman who had simply collapsed without warning. I admitted Serafina to the ICU at 2:45 a.m. on October 16. Because several of our rooms were occupied with long-term patients, Serafina was assigned to room 237, a corner room that typically housed our most critical cases. Room 237 had an interesting history in our ICU. It was one of the original rooms when the hospital was built in 1987, and over the years, it had developed a reputation among the nursing staff as being unlucky. More patients died in room 237 than in any other ICU room, though the medical administration had always attributed this to the fact that we typically assigned our most critically ill patients to that room because of its size and location near the nurses' station. The nursing staff had other theories. Room 237 was where our most experienced nurses preferred to work, because they said it taught them to recognize when patients were transitioning, the clinical term we use for the process of dying. But they also claimed that room 237 felt different from other rooms in ways they couldn't articulate professionally. There's something about 237, Jessica Romano, our head night nurse, had told me years earlier. It's like the room knows things before we do. I can always tell when a patient in 237 isn't going to make it, even when their medical numbers look stable. I had always dismissed these observations as superstition combined with the natural pattern recognition that experienced nurses develop over years of working with critically ill patients. But as I settled Serafina into room 237 during the early morning hours of October 16th, I began to notice things about the room that I had never paid attention to before. The first unusual thing I noticed about Serafina's case was that room 237 seemed consistently colder than the rest of the ICU. This wasn't immediately obvious. October nights in North Carolina can be cool, and hospital air conditioning systems sometimes have inconsistencies. But over the course of Serafina's first few days in our care, the temperature difference became impossible to ignore. Our ICU is maintained at a steady 72 degrees Fahrenheit throughout all patient rooms, but room 237, specifically, The area within about 4 feet of Serafina's bed felt significantly colder. At first I assumed there was a problem with the room's heating system or air circulation. I contacted our facilities management team on October 17th, Serafina's second day in the ICU. Tom Rodriguez, our head of facilities, spent 3 hours in room 237 with his team, checking air vents, testing the thermostat, and examining the HVAC system that served that section of the hospital. Hartwell, Tom told me after his inspection, there's nothing wrong with the heating system. The air coming through the vents is the same temperature as every other room in the ICU. The thermostat is functioning normally, and there are no drafts or air leaks that would cause temperature variation. But the cold remained. Using a digital thermometer, I began taking temperature readings at different locations in room 237 during my rounds. The results were consistent and medically inexplicable. At Serafina's bedside, 64 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 feet from her bed, 67 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Near the room's door, 71 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Hallway outside room 237, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature seemed to radiate outward from Serafina herself, as if her body was somehow drawing heat from the surrounding environment. Serafina's family began arriving at the hospital on October 17th. Her parents, Margaret and Edmund Blackwood, drove up from their retirement home in Savannah, Georgia. Her older sister, Evangeline, flew in from Portland, Oregon, and her younger brother, Nathaniel, took emergency leave from his job in Charlotte to be with his sister. The Blackwood family was close-knit, but lived scattered across the country. They hadn't all been together in the same place for over 2 years, but Serafina's condition brought them together with a mixture of love, fear, and desperate hope. Margaret Blackwood, a retired high school English teacher, was a tall, elegant woman in her 60s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes that reminded me immediately of her daughter. She took charge of the family's communication with medical staff and asked detailed, thoughtful questions about Serafina's condition and treatment. "Dr. Hartwell," she said during our first family meeting, "Serafina has always been the healthiest one in our family. She doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, exercises regularly, and has never had any significant health problems. What happened to her doesn't make sense." Edmund Blackwood, Serafina's father, was a retired carpenter who had worked his entire career building custom homes throughout the Southeast. He was a man of few words, but his love for his daughter was evident in the way he sat by her bedside, holding her hand and speaking to her in gentle, encouraging tones. "She can hear us," he told me confidently. "I know she can. When I talked to her about the old oak tree in our backyard that she used to climb as a little girl, her heart rate changes on the monitor. She's in there, doctor. She's fighting to come back." During Serafina's first week in room 237, the temperature anomaly became more pronounced. The nursing staff began commenting on it regularly, and several nurses requested different room assignments rather than work with Serafina during their shifts. Patricia Williams, one of our most experienced ICU nurses, approached me on October 22nd with concerns that went beyond professional discomfort. "Dr. Hartwell," Patricia said, "I've been working in this ICU for 18 years. I've cared for dying patients, trauma victims, and people in every possible medical crisis. But room 237, there's something different happening in there." Patricia explained that she had worked 3 consecutive night shifts, caring for Serafina, and each night, the cold in the room had become more intense. "It's not just cold," she said. "It's a different kind of cold. It feels unnatural. When I'm taking Serafina's vital signs, I can see my breath. In a heated hospital room, doctor, that's not normal." I spent more time in room 237 during my overnight rounds, trying to understand what was happening and whether there could be any medical explanation for the temperature phenomenon. I consulted with colleagues at other hospitals, researched medical literature, and even contacted environmental specialists to see if there could be some unknown factor affecting the room's climate. No one had any answers. While the temperature mystery continued to puzzle everyone at the hospital, Serafina's medical condition remained stable but unchanged. She was breathing with the assistance of a ventilator, her heart rhythm had stabilized with medication, and her kidney function was improving after the initial shock of her cardiac arrest. But she showed no signs of regaining consciousness. Dr. Chen performed daily neurological assessments and consulted with neurosurgeons at Duke University Medical Center about Serafina's case. The consensus was that while her brain had suffered some damage from the period of oxygen deprivation during her cardiac arrest, the damage didn't appear severe enough to preclude recovery. The challenging thing about Serafina's case, Dr. Chen explained to the family during a meeting on October 25th, is that medically she should be showing more signs of improvement by now. Her brain scans show some swelling and reduced activity, but nothing that would explain why she remains unconscious after 10 days. Serafina's family maintained a constant vigil. Margaret read to her daughter from classic novels, Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, and Charles Dickens. Evangeline played classical music and jazz recordings that Serafina had always loved. Nathaniel brought photos from family gatherings and told stories about their childhood adventures. Edmund continued to hold his daughter's hand and speak to her about memories from her childhood. He was convinced that Serafina was aware of their presence and was fighting to return to consciousness. As Serafina's second week in room 237 progressed, other unusual phenomena began occurring beyond the temperature anomaly. The nursing staff reported that electronic equipment in the room would occasionally malfunction in ways that couldn't be explained by technical problems. The cardiac monitor would sometimes display irregular readings that didn't correspond to Serafina's actual heart rhythm. The ventilator would occasionally alarm for no apparent reason, indicating problems that technical inspections couldn't identify. IV pumps would stop working randomly and then resume normal function when moved to different rooms. More disturbing were the reports from night shift staff about unusual sounds coming from room 237. Multiple nurses reported hearing what sounded like whispered conversations coming from the room during early morning hours when only Serafina was present. "I know it sounds crazy, doctor," said Marcus Thompson, a respiratory therapist who worked regularly with ventilator patients, "but I've heard voices in that room 3 different nights. Not clear enough to understand what's being said, but definitely the sound of people talking quietly. When I go in to check, it's just Serafina on the ventilator." I began spending more time in room 237 during the overnight hours, sitting with Serafina and monitoring her condition while trying to observe any unusual phenomena myself. The cold was undeniable. I had to wear a jacket when spending extended time in the room, even though the October weather outside was mild. But it was during these quiet hours that I began to notice something even more disturbing about Serafina's case. 3 weeks into Serafina's stay in our ICU, I began experiencing vivid dreams that seemed directly connected to room 237 and my patient. These weren't typical stress dreams or the kind of subconscious processing that medical professionals often experience when dealing with difficult cases. These dreams were extraordinarily detailed, consistent, and felt more real than my waking experiences. In the dreams, I would find myself standing in room 237, but the room appeared different, older, with different medical equipment and different lighting. Serafina would be conscious in these dreams, sitting up in bed and speaking to me with perfect clarity. "Dr. Hartwell," she would say in the dreams, "I'm not supposed to be here yet, but I can't find my way back." The dreams always took place in what appeared to be the same version of room 237, and Serafina would tell me things about the hospital, about other patients who had died in that room, and about experiences that seemed to exist outside of normal time and space. Most disturbing was that details from these dreams began corresponding to actual events and information that I couldn't have known through normal means. The dreams motivated me to research the history of room 237 and the patients who had been treated there over the years. I spent my off hours reviewing medical records, talking to retired nursing staff, and examining the patterns of patient outcomes in that room compared to other ICU rooms. What I discovered was troubling in ways that challenged my understanding of medicine and mortality. Over the 36 years that room 237 had been in use, it had housed 1,247 patients. Of those patients, 394 had died, a mortality rate of 31.6%, which was significantly higher than the ICU average of 22.3%. But more interesting than the statistics were the details I found in old nursing notes and incident reports. Going back decades, nursing staff had documented unusual phenomena in room 237, unexplained temperature drops, equipment malfunctions, strange sounds, and patients who reported unusual dreams or visions before dying. Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, who had served as ICU director from 1987 to 2003, agreed to meet with me at a coffee shop near the hospital. Dr. Mitchell was now 82 years old and had been retired for 20 years, but she remembered room 237 clearly. Room 237 taught me more about death and dying than medical school ever did. Dr. Mitchell told me, there was something about that room that seemed to make the boundary between life and death more permeable. Patients who were dying would often become lucid in ways that defied their medical condition. They would speak about seeing deceased family members, about preparing for a journey, about not being alone. Dr. Mitchell paused and studied my face carefully. "You're experiencing something unusual in that room, aren't you, doctor?" I told her about Serafina's case, the temperature anomaly, the equipment malfunctions, and my disturbing dreams. "The dreams are the most significant part," Dr. Mitchell said. "Over my 16 years of working with room 237, I learned that when the room starts affecting the medical staff, it usually means something important is about to happen. The room seems to choose certain doctors and nurses to witness transitions." During my conversation with Dr. Mitchell, she gave me advice that would prove prophetic. "Dr. Hartwell," she said, "whatever is happening with your patient, whatever you're experiencing in room 237, pay attention to it. Don't dismiss it as stress or imagination. In my experience, room 237 doesn't reveal its secrets randomly. If you're having dreams about your patient, if you're sensing things that don't fit medical explanation, it's because you're being prepared to witness something significant." She leaned forward across the coffee shop table. "Room 237 has taught me that death isn't always the end of consciousness, and life isn't always the beginning of awareness. Sometimes patients get caught in between, and they need someone to help them complete their journey." I left that conversation feeling both enlightened and deeply unsettled. Dr. Mitchell's words suggested that what was happening with Serafina might be part of a larger phenomenon that had been occurring in room 237 for decades. As October progressed toward November, the unusual phenomena surrounding Serafina intensified. The temperature in room 237 continued to drop, sometimes reaching what felt like the low 50s, despite the hospital's heating system functioning normally. More concerning were the changes in Serafina herself. While she remained unconscious and on mechanical ventilation, her appearance began to change in subtle but noticeable ways. Her skin became paler, almost translucent. Her dark hair, which had been lustrous and healthy when she arrived, began to lose its color and take on a silvery quality. These changes weren't consistent with any known medical condition or side effect of her treatment. Blood tests showed normal nutrition levels, adequate oxygen saturation, and stable organ function. There was no medical reason for the physical changes we were observing. The Blackwood family noticed these changes as well and became increasingly distressed. Margaret spent hours each day brushing Serafina's hair and applying moisturizer to her skin, trying to maintain some sense of normal care and appearance. "She's fading away," Edmund told me one evening as he sat beside his daughter's bed. "I can feel her slipping away from us, doctor. It's like she's becoming more distant every day, even though she's right here." As Serafina entered her 4th week in room 237, I began to suspect that we were approaching a critical point in her case. The dreams were becoming more frequent and more urgent. In them, Serafina would plead with me to help her find her way home, but she couldn't explain where home was or how to get there. The temperature in room 237 had dropped so significantly that frost occasionally formed on the windows during early morning hours. The nursing staff had begun wearing heavy sweaters and jackets when providing care for Serafina, and several had requested permanent transfers to other units rather than continue working in what they described as supernatural conditions. Most disturbing was what began happening during the overnight hours between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Room 237 would become so cold that breath was visible, and sensitive equipment would sometimes shut down due to temperature sensors detecting conditions outside normal operating parameters. It was during this time that other patients in nearby rooms began reporting strange experiences. Patients who were conscious and recovering from their own medical conditions told their nurses about hearing voices coming from room 237, seeing strange lights under the door, and feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness and longing when they were wheeled past the room for tests or procedures. As Halloween approached, a detail that now seems almost too perfect to be coincidental, I realized that whatever was happening with Serafina Blackwood was building towards something significant. The dreams, the cold, the equipment, malfunctions, and the changes in Serafina herself were all part of a phenomenon that medical science couldn't explain, but that seemed to follow its own inexorable logic. What happened in room 237 during the first week of November would challenge everything I thought I knew about consciousness, death, and the possibility of existence beyond physical life. What I'm about to tell you happened on November 3rd, 2023, during what would become the most extraordinary and terrifying night of my medical career. It was a Friday evening, and I had just started my 7 p.m. shift when I received an urgent page from Jessica Romano, our head night nurse. "Dr. Hartwell, you need to get to room 237 immediately." Her voice was tight with concern. "Something's happening with Serafina." I rushed to room 237 and immediately understood Jessica's alarm. The temperature in the room had dropped so dramatically that I could see my breath the moment I stepped through the doorway. But this wasn't the gradual cold we had been experiencing for weeks. This was an intense bone-deep chill that seemed to penetrate through clothing and skin directly to the soul. More shocking was Serafina herself. For the first time in nearly 4 weeks, her eyes were open, not the vacant, unseeing stare of an unconscious patient, but alert, focused eyes that tracked my movement as I approached her bedside. "Dr. Hartwell," she said clearly, though she was still connected to the ventilator, something that should have been medically impossible. "I've been waiting for you." I stood frozen beside Serafina's bed, trying to process what I was witnessing. Patients on mechanical ventilation cannot speak. The breathing tube prevents air from passing through the vocal cords. Yet Serafina was speaking with perfect clarity, her voice carrying despite the medical equipment that should have made communication impossible. "I know this doesn't make sense," Serafina continued, her eyes never leaving mine, "but I need you to understand what's happening to me. I'm caught between two worlds, Dr. Hartwell. I can see both places, but I can't find my way to either one." The room had become so cold that frost was literally forming on the windows and medical equipment. The heart monitor showed a steady normal rhythm, but the numbers seemed almost irrelevant compared to the impossible conversation taking place. "Serafina," I managed to say, "how are you able to speak?" The ventilator is keeping my body alive," she replied. "But my consciousness, my soul, it's somewhere else entirely." I'm speaking to you from that place, Dr. Hartwell, and I need your help to complete my journey. Jessica Romano appeared beside me, her face pale with shock and confusion. She had heard everything, but like me, she couldn't explain what we were witnessing. Over the next hour, Serafina told us things that challenged every assumption I had about life, death, and consciousness. She described her experience during the weeks of apparent unconsciousness, how she had been aware of every conversation, every touch, every moment her family spent beside her bed. I heard my father talking about the oak tree in our backyard, she said. I heard my mother reading Jane Austen. I heard my sister playing Chopin, and my brother telling stories about our childhood, but I couldn't respond because I wasn't entirely here anymore. She explained that on the night she collapsed in her home, she had experienced what she called a calling, a powerful pull towards something beyond physical existence. But instead of a peaceful transition, she had become trapped in a liminal space between life and death. Room 237 is special, Dr. Hartwell, Serafina continued. It's a threshold. Patients don't die here, they transition through here. But sometimes, like with me, souls get caught in the crossing. I thought about Dr. Mitchell's words, about the history of unusual phenomena in room 237, about the dreams I had been experiencing. Everything began to make a terrible, impossible sense. Serafina asked me to bring her family to the room, despite my medical training screaming that this situation was beyond any known science. I found myself following her request. Margaret, Edmund, Evangeline, and Nathaniel gathered around her bed, initially shocked by her apparent consciousness, but quickly accepting this miraculous moment. I need you all to know that I love you, Serafina said to her family, and I need you to understand that what's about to happen isn't an ending, it's a beginning. I can see the place I'm going, and it's beautiful beyond description. Edmund took his daughter's hand, tears streaming down his face. We're not ready to let you go, sweetheart. I know, Daddy, Serafina replied, but I've been trying to hold on to this world for you, and it's keeping me from reaching the next one. I need you to give me permission to leave. The family spent the next 30 minutes sharing memories, expressing love, and saying goodbye in ways that most families never get the opportunity to do. Margaret read a passage from Pride and Prejudice, Evangeline hummed a Chopin nocturne, and Nathaniel told one more childhood story. As the family's goodbye concluded, the phenomena in room 237 intensified beyond anything we had experienced. The temperature dropped so low that ice began forming on the medical equipment. The lights dimmed without any electrical malfunction. The air itself seemed to shimmer and move in patterns that defied physics. Most remarkably, other patients throughout the ICU began reporting shared experiences. Conscious patients in nearby rooms said they could sense a presence moving through the unit, and several described seeing a beautiful woman in a white dress walking peacefully through the halls. It's time, Serafina said, her voice becoming fainter but somehow more luminous. Dr. Hartwell, thank you for helping me understand what was happening. Jessica, thank you for caring for my body while my soul was learning to let go. She turned to her family one final time. Watch for me in the sunrise tomorrow morning. I'll be there, whole and free, and happy. What happened next defied every law of medicine and physics I had ever studied. Serafina closed her eyes peacefully, and the medical monitors showed the gradual cessation of life signs. But the room filled with what I can only describe as light, not from any electrical source, but a warm golden illumination that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. The impossible cold that had plagued room 237 for weeks suddenly lifted, replaced by a comfortable warmth that felt like a spring morning. The frost on the windows melted instantly, the medical equipment resumed normal function, and in that moment of transition, every person in the room, family, nursing staff and myself, experienced something that I still struggle to describe. We felt an overwhelming sense of peace, completion, and joy that seemed to communicate that Serafina had successfully reached wherever she had been trying to go. The official time of death was 11:47 p.m. on November 3, 2023. exactly 1 month after her initial collapse. In the days following Serafina's death, room 237 returned to normal temperature and function. The unusual phenomena that had plagued the room for weeks simply ended. Equipment worked properly, the temperature remained consistent with the rest of the ICU, and the oppressive atmosphere that had troubled nursing staff was replaced by a sense of peace. But the impact of that night on everyone who witnessed it was profound and lasting. Jessica Romano transferred to the pediatric unit the following week, saying she needed to work with patients who were fighting for life rather than transitioning from it. Several other nurses requested different assignments, not from fear, but from a sense that they had witnessed something so sacred that their perspective on medicine had fundamentally changed. The Blackwood family, despite their grief, expressed gratitude for the opportunity to say goodbye and to witness what they described as their daughter's peaceful journey to whatever comes after life. 2 weeks after Serafina's death, I submitted my resignation from Riverside Memorial Medical Center. My letter to the administration was brief and professional, citing a desire to pursue different opportunities. But the truth was that witnessing Serafina's impossible awakening and transition had shattered my confidence in everything I thought I knew about medicine, consciousness, and the nature of human existence. How could I continue treating patients with the certainty required for critical care medicine when I had seen undeniable evidence that consciousness could exist independently of brain function? How could I make life and death decisions based on medical protocols when I had witnessed a patient communicate clearly while on mechanical ventilation? I moved to a small coastal town and opened a general family practice, focusing on routine medical care and preventive health. I deliberately avoided any cases involving critical care, neurology, or end-of-life situations. 3 months have passed since that extraordinary night in room 237, but I think about Serafina Blackwood every day. Her case raised questions that medical science cannot answer and challenged assumptions about consciousness, death, and the possibility of existence beyond physical life. Was Serafina's awakening a neurological phenomenon that we simply don't understand yet? Was it a psychological response to dying that manifested in ways that seemed supernatural, or was it exactly what it appeared to be, evidence that consciousness can persist and communicate even when the body is failing? I've researched similar cases in medical literature and found scattered reports of deathbed phenomena, terminal lucidity, and near-death experiences that echo elements of what we witnessed. But none fully explain the totality of Serafina's case: the temperature changes, the equipment malfunctions, the shared experiences of multiple witnesses, and her impossible ability to communicate while on mechanical ventilation. On the morning after Serafina's death, Margaret Blackwood called me at home. Through tears, she told me that she had watched the sunrise from her hotel room window and had seen something that filled her with peace and joy. "Dr. Hartwell," she said, "Serafina kept her promise. She was in that sunrise, whole and beautiful and free." I know that probably sounds like grief talking, but I felt her presence so strongly that I know she made it safely to wherever she was trying to go. I didn't tell Margaret that I had watched the same sunrise from my apartment balcony and had experienced the same inexplicable sense of Serafina's presence and joy. The case of Serafina Blackwood will always remain the most unexplained and transformative experience of my medical career. It taught me that medicine, for all its advances and sophistication, still contains profound mysteries that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about life, consciousness, and death. Room 237 continues to serve ICU patients at Riverside Memorial Medical Center. According to colleagues who still work there, it functions normally now. Proper temperature, reliable equipment, and no unusual phenomena. But I've heard that some of the nursing staff still refer to it as Serafina's room and say that patients who are dying there seem to experience particularly peaceful transitions. Perhaps that's Serafina's lasting gift to room 237, transforming a place where souls got lost in transition into a place where they find their way home. Whatever the truth about consciousness, death,
and what lies beyond physical existence. Serafina Blackwood showed me that the boundary between life and death is far more complex and mysterious than medical science currently understands. Her impossible awakening reminded me that human experience contains elements that transcend our current knowledge, and that sometimes the most important truths can't be measured by medical equipment or explained by scientific protocols. In the end, Serafina's case taught me that dying, like living, is a journey, and sometimes souls need help finding their way to whatever comes next.